Hello everyone, I'm Leah Toms from the marketing team and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar. It's been a few turbulent weeks for Entrust customers and it's leaving many of you with questions on where you get your public SSL certificates from November the 1st. We've got Nick France, Chief Technology Officer for SSL, and Tim Callan, Chief Compliance Officer here for you to talk you through the Entrust Distrust and also answer any of your questions. As always, we're recording this presentation and we will share that with you after the webinar. If you've got any questions, we'd love to support you with them. Please use the chat function and we'll try and answer as many as we can at the end. Nick and Tim, handing over to you.
Thank you, Leah. Hi, Nick.
Hey, Tim, and thanks, Leah, as well. How are you, Tim?
So we're going to talk about this trust and what happened. One of the things that you and I have both experienced talking about this with people is kind of a fundamental misunderstanding of what the power structure is around root trust and how an event like this actually occurs. And the question that we both heard a bunch of times from different sources is, well, why did Cab Forum do this? Or might Cab Forum change its mind? Or do you agree with this decision from Cab Forum? The first thing we have to explain is Cab Forum didn't do this. The CA Browser Forum, right, the CA Browser Forum is a voluntary organization of certificate authorities like us and what they call consumers of certificates, which is software that depends on certificates like Chrome or Apple or Microsoft. And these organizations get together in order to agree on as many of the rules around the industries as we can, so that there is one set of rules that everybody can keep an eye on and monitor rather than 4 or 8 or a dozen. And it's really to facilitate understanding, consistent understanding of how public CAs are going to work, and to make it easier for CAs to be compliant and easier for the community to monitor that compliance. And that's an extremely important critical function. And what the major root stores do is they include in their requirements that you must follow the CA Browser Forum rules. And then also some of them will have some additional requirements as well. And so the way to think about this is there are 4 major root stores: Chrome, Apple, Mozilla, Microsoft, as you see listed here. If you are compliant with those root stores and you're in those root stores, you've covered almost all of what you might need in the world, pragmatically speaking. And if you follow the CA Browser Forum requirements and a few other things, then you can be compliant with all of these root stores. But that's where it stops. Each individual root store individually chooses which roots are in or out of its set of trusted roots. Right, Nick?
Exactly, yeah, and I think it's good to get that clarity because we, as you said, you and I have seen a lot of questions come up about why did the Cab Forum do this and how does it work, and it's good to understand that although we have this voluntary body that creates the guidelines and then that gets created into the audit guidelines that we as CAs have to follow, decisions about whether a CA is trusted or not is not made by the Cab Forum. It's made by the root stores, as we call them here, and there are really 4 major ones that you've listed. So it's important to understand that before we start talking about what's happened and what's going on.
Right, and so what we're talking about here is an action by one of these 4 root stores, not the other 3, yes. Not the Cab Forum as a whole. But that said, it is an action by one of these 4 root stores, but it's also worth noting that over the years, we've seen a great deal of consistency of behavior between these root stores. And I can't think of an instance of a distrust coming from one of these 4 that was not followed by one or more, sometimes all, of the others of these 4. So the fact that one of these, the fact that Chrome took the action it took, should put us all on alert for whether or not one of these other root stores, or more than one of these other root stores, will be following suit.
Yeah, I think what we've seen today so far is Google take action. I think, you and I both know that the other root programs will probably follow suit. They operate on different cadences, right? So they operate at
Yeah.
different times with their software update. They have different, policy schedules and things like that. But they almost all follow the same pattern at different times. And I also think there probably have been some distrusts that have only happened in one program because a CA was perhaps only trusted in one program. There are some CAs that are perhaps only trusted or are only trusted on Microsoft and not all the others. So where a CA is trusted across all the different programs, we do tend to see, or we always see, when one of them makes a distrust action, the others will follow suit at some point in the future after that. I expect that we'll see some things happening from the
that's
other
a good
three
clarification.
in the coming weeks.
Certainly, distrusts of this sort have, in my memory, always been followed by other programs. And so what are these criteria? So the WebPK has witnessed, it's actually 14 trust deprecations. We looked it up. And when these deprecations have occurred, and this is me interpreting, there aren't really specific codified rules about exactly when a distrust does not occur. There's guidance that we get. There's philosophy that we get from certain root stores. Particularly Chrome has been pretty vocal about what they're looking for. But I feel that the distrusts that we've seen, the trust deprecations we've seen, owe themselves to one of two things, and we'll call it competence and integrity. And basically, what competence is lack of community belief that the CA involved has the technical chops to get this right, or the procedural chops. They're making technical errors, they're making errors in how they function, process errors. These errors aren't getting better, they're not showing a capability to solve them or a willingness to solve them, right? That would be a competence concern. And I'm going to contend that every trust deprecation except one in the history of the web PKI has come with doubts about the CA's competence.
Yep.
The second one is what I'll call integrity concerns. This is worries that the CA is prepared to do the hard things it must do to take its role as a trusted steward of the web PKI sufficiently importantly. This is CAs who are engaged in what appears to be obfuscation or poor communication, or CAs that don't appear to be willing to prioritize the hard work of being, of being a steward of trust over other things. These are sometimes CAs who seem to want to put their paying customers' benefit ahead of the benefit of the overall security of the internet. And as I said here, lack of transparency and willful disobedience are common problems that get CAs in trouble with this. And again, this is a very common thread. Every trust deprecation I've seen except one has come with concerns about the integrity of the CA, about the CA's willingness to take the high road even when it's hard.
I think that's an important point, Tim, that you just
Right.
that you did touch upon there, and for context for everybody, you've used words like competence and integrity. I think it's important to understand how those four groups, the four browsers or the trust stores as we call them, what their position is here. And obviously, I can't speak for them, but I can speak to my understanding. If you look at Google, for example, Google represent billions and billions of users on the internet. Everybody that uses a Chrome browser, everybody that uses an Android handset, everybody that uses a Chrome OS device of some form, billions and billions of users. And what they are doing is they are entrusting the CAs with a responsibility to protect those billions of users, to make sure that certificates are issued and function correctly. And so when Google decide to take actions like this, what they are doing is they are taking actions in the best interest of those billions of users. And so are Apple, and so are Microsoft, and so are Mozilla. And so they need a CA to meet these two big words. They need to be competent and they need to have integrity, because if they do not, it's billions of Google and Microsoft and Apple and Mozilla's users that are at risk by this. So I think it's important to add that context, Tim, because when we talk about the web PKI, we are talking about billions and billions of users, and they can't be represented, individually, but they are represented in our industry as the browsers. They are stewards for billions and billions of users.
Absolutely.
And
The
so
browsers.
when they want to take action, they are doing that in representation of the safety and the security of those
Right.
billions of users. And I just think that's kind of
and-
important context when you're using words like integrity.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And by the way, that includes you and me and everybody listening to this webinar.
Absolutely.
Right? We are those people, right? And they are doing that because they feel they have a responsibility to us and our neighbors and our families and our friends and our coworkers and 5 or 6 other billion people on the planet.
Exactly.
And the last point here that's worth clarifying is that these things are never a surprise. There may perhaps be a surprise about the specific timing. Sometimes we go, oh, I didn't think that was going to happen quite this early, or, oh, I'm surprised this took that long. But never once has there been a distrust that I can think of where people said, wow, really? It's always been yeah, okay, I can see that.
Yeah,
And
none of them
so
seem to have come out of the
that's
blue.
worth
None of them seem
understanding as
to have.
well.
None of them seem to have happened as a result of, let's say, something like private information. We haven't seen Google come out and say, we are distrusting XCA, and we're not going to say why.
Yep.
And there's no public information as to why. That doesn't happen. I mean, sure, that the thing might happen on an individual certificate basis from time to time, but from a CA basis, as you correctly said here, no CA has just been distrusted out of the blue, and on short notice as well. I think out of the blue is not only something that is unknown before, but also very quickly. That just hasn't happened. All of these things, these distrusts, have happened as a result of a pattern of problems, which is what we're going to talk about.
Exactly. And probably the last point that's not on here that's worth making, but we already sort of did, is this is a very rare thing. Like, this doesn't happen much. It happens very rarely. And when it happens, again, it's really for good reason, and it's easy to see the reasons. So these are just some quotes from the Chrome program, right? When things don't go right, we expect CA owners to commit to meaningful and demonstrable change, resulting in evidence continuous improvement. And then down below, in a different spot in this message, this blog post, concerning behaviors, these concerning behaviors eroded our confidence in Entrust competence, reliability, and integrity as a publicly trusted CA owner. And notice 2 of those words that I used on the previous slide appearing right here in Chrome's words. So that's what went on here. It was this loss of confidence in these 2 things, as we talked about before. Now, as a consequence of this, Chrome has taken action. How it is there's something called a signed certificate timestamp. And for our purposes, let's just say this is when the certificate is issued. And the reason there's an SCT as opposed to just an issuance not before date is, in principle, not before dates can be doctored and SCTs cannot. Nobody is saying that anybody has or would, but they don't even want that possibility to exist. And so what they're going to do is they're going to look at the signed certificate timestamp, and anything that is dated after October 31st, 2024 will not be trusted by default. What this means is that up through October 31st, 2024, Entrust can continue to issue certificates, and those certificates will be trusted in Chrome browsers for their full lifespan, even beyond November 1, 2024. So if I go get a certificate on November 30 and it's issued, and I stick it on my site, it will work for the full period of time that it was issued for, up to 398 days. And there is no action by Google to affect that. However, starting November 2024, any certificate that I get on these 9 Entrust routes will not work right now, immediately, the day I get it. And so this is designed, I believe, to minimize disruption, to allow this distrust event to take place without forcing a bunch of subscribers to scramble to swap out certs that they already own or to scramble to get a new provider in a particularly fast time frame. So if you've got some certs that you already issued that are on Entrust certs, or if you've got some credits with Entrust that you want to burn up before you move away, this makes it possible for you to do that. And it makes it possible for you to have a proper project to find a new provider and use them rather than just suddenly having to get somebody tomorrow.
Yeah, I think it's good to know that this is a relatively new feature, and this is perhaps one of the reasons why Google have taken this action first, is because historically when we've seen distrust events, if you go all the way back to the then Symantec distrust back in 2017, it was one of those things that happened like a big bang event. The root program had to decide all the certificates issued from these routes by this CA are going to be distrusted on date X. They didn't have the ability to say some certificates can live out their natural lives and some can't. I think you touched upon one of the reasons there, Tim. I mean, they don't want the possibility that someone could doctor the not before date, the start date of the certificate, and set that back or set that forward as opposed to the date it was actually issued. And these SCTs are part of certificate transparency. So these timestamps that are mentioned on this slide here will actually come from third parties. They don't come from the CA itself, and so it's much harder for them to be forged or faked. And so it's now possible for Google at least to have this distrust mechanism that can almost be phased in, and it can be phased in with minimal impact to existing customers and existing certificates. But as you've clearly said here, and it clearly states from Google, is after or on November the 1st and thereafter, new certificates will not be trusted. So you have to find a new CA to be able to issue certificates from by November. One other point I do want to make quickly on this slide, Tim, is we talked about the timelines in here. This is what Google have published. However, in the memo, if you like, the notification they published about this, they did make a statement that they expect Entrust to continue to operate their CA properly and professionally from even after the distrust notice from Google.
For the full duration of the lifespan of those certificates. Yeah, they need to be doing things like revocation checking, for sure.
They did say that could, if they didn't do that, then this timeline could be accelerated. So I think what Google is saying there is, look, even though we're distrusting you, that doesn't mean you could just down tools and go home. You have to continue your responsibilities for the certificates that are out there. And Entrust are doing that. I mean, we can see that publicly. You and I know that, Tim. So I don't think there's a risk that timeline will be accelerated. But I do think it's important to mention that Google have placed that in the memo and said it is a possibility if Entrust decide not to continue to fulfill their responsibilities as a CA.
Thank you, Nick. That is a very important point. You and I have not seen any indication of Entrust doing that, right? What you and I have seen is that Entrust appears to be completely committed to doing exactly what they need to do to preserve these certs, and we agree with that. That's the right choice. It's what they should do, right? So
yes, absolutely.
There's no reason to believe not. But you're totally right. If suddenly January 1 rolls around and they say, forget it, they fire all their staff and they stop operating their servers, then Google and other CAs can take more extreme action, and they will, right? Not that we expect that.
Yeah. Not that we expect it now.
Correct. So, and in case you think that this was perhaps a surprise, it was not at all a surprise. We're looking at 18 bugs that were opened from the period of March 1 to July 1. 15 of which remained open at the end of that period of time. 661 comments posted, more words posted on these bugs than the length of the novel, the famously long novel Moby Dick. This was a highly visible, widely discussed, widely commented on set of circumstances leading up to this distrust event. There was a lot of dissatisfaction with their handling of the bugs. One could contend that the handling of the bugs was worse than the bugs. And this also includes promises that were made in 2020 that essentially weren't kept. And that was another problem as well. And so again, if you're surprised by this, it's because you're not following this part of the industry. But for people who are, this was definitely the big event of the last several years. and had an enormous amount of attention on it. And so when this event finally came about from Chrome, I have to think that most of us were just wondering when such a thing was going to occur. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think we probably covered all this. You and I have this habit of discussing it before we get through it. I think we did this here. Yes.
I think the last two bullets are important on
yeah.
this one, though, Tim. I think
Yeah.
it's important to note that we're only talking. I mean, Chrome, Google only really care about web PKI server certificates, TLS certificates, server auth certificates, SSL, if people still call it that.
Right.
So it's only those certificates that are going to be affected. There are some questions, some I'd say researchers or even customers have publicly asked questions about things like Entrust S-MIME certificates and VMC, the BIMI certificates as well.
Mm-hmm.
There's been no official response, particularly from Google, apart from to say they're looking at it so far.
Right.
I'm sure there's been questions asked about code signing from Microsoft's perspective. None of those have been affected so far. So this is really only TLS. That's not to say these other things won't happen. They are the decisions of the Gmail team within Google for VMC, for example, and S-MIME, and the code signing team within Microsoft for those. But really, it is just TLS at the moment.
If we see a distrust from Apple, you would expect it to affect all three of the types listed here. That they wouldn't, if Apple decides to distrust, you would not expect them to just distrust TLS. They would probably distrust TLS and S-MIME and VMC all at the same time. So the point I'm making here is, while at the moment there is no distrust for S-MIME and VMC and code signing, you're right, Nick, and code signing, let's keep those on a watch list. Don't say, well, these are unaffected, my S-MIMEs are unaffected. You don't know that. They're unaffected now, but it would not at all be surprising if we're having a different conversation 30 days from today.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right? So that's the point. Those guys are not, those types are not in a safe haven at all. They are very much at risk.
I think one other thing to mention on that, though, Tim, that we haven't said here is, and Entrust have been clear about this in their communications, though, private PKI, and again, Entrust are a big provider of internal or private PKI, that is unaffected, okay?
Correct.
Obviously, that's unaffected because they don't rely on the root stores, but it is worth bearing in mind and stating that, again, it is only TLS we're talking about. There is a risk for other public certificate types, but private PKI from Entrust, internal PKI from Entrust is completely unaffected by this and will not have any impacts on that here.
Absolutely, and none of these programs has the power to impact that.
Exactly.
From Mozilla's case, they have created what they call an Entrust Issues wiki page. And this has been done, I don't know, maybe about 10 times. And nobody that has a CA name issues wiki page is still a trusted CA today in the Mozilla root store. So that is something that historically has always predated distrust. Now there hasn't been any action by Mozilla, and maybe this will be the time that'll be different, but it's definitely a strong signal to be cautious about that. So we may see a distrust follow from Mozilla as well. That's just something else for us to keep an eye on. And to some degree, this is irrelevant because distrust from Chrome basically makes these certificates commercially unviable. And though I haven't seen an announcement from Entrust, I'm assuming that starting November 1, you won't be able to buy a public TLS cert from them, that they won't sell you one. That's my guess. However, distrust from a second browser just really, really makes a huge barrier to the prospect of potentially coming back later. If you were distrusted from one root store and you sat in the other root stores, you might in principle go petition for re-inclusion to that root store and say, hey, look, I cleaned up my act and I got better the things that I was bad at, and now I want to go get back into your root store. And maybe they would say yes, the root stores get to do what they want, and what they want to do is do what they think is best for the web PKI, and they might do that. However, once a second major root store has distrusted you, then getting back into that first root store doesn't solve your problem. Now you have two organizations that have to agree. And let's say distrust comes from a third root store. Now you have three organizations that have to agree. So one of the reasons that the subsequent distrusts are important, not only because it really clarifies that these certs aren't commercially usable, and not only because it might affect other things like SMIME certs, but also because it makes re-inclusion into these root stores considerably harder sometime in the future.
I mean, there's a couple of points I wanted to touch on this one, Tim, if I may. So, as you said earlier, we haven't really seen any official communication from other root programs yet, and that's largely because at least two of the other programs, Microsoft and Apple, they're private companies and they operate. It's not in secrecy, but they operate privately. So what we expect to happen,
decisions, and they announce their decisions, right?
We may see announcements, but this particular page that you talked about, Mozilla are an open organization. All the Bugzilla incidents that you talked about before, all of this happens in public. So we can see kind of in the direction to which Mozilla is leaning. And as you've said, an ECA that's had one of these wiki pages, like an issues wiki page, has historically not remained trusted with Mozilla. But as you have mentioned, another root program distrusting them is probably the end of their ability. I think I do want to touch on a little bit on what you mentioned about kind of coming back from this, because I don't think we have an explicit slide to talk about this. But when this has happened before, and I think again this time with Google, is the root programs have always left it open to the CA in a way to say you can come back if you prove yourself. And what that means is Entrust are going to be distrusted. I don't think even Entrust would disagree with the fact that Google are not going to change their decision. If we see an announcement from Microsoft or Apple or Mozilla, that will absolutely confirm it. But I don't think even Entrust believe at this point that Google are going to reverse their decision. What they have said to them, though, is that they can effectively go back and reapply for inclusion and basically start again. So they could go back, have all their systems. Just like anyone else would. If you wanted to become a trusted CA today, you would go through a process of building up your infrastructure and your teams, getting everything audited. Then you would apply for inclusion in the root programs. You go through the hoops you have to with each one of them. And that would it takes some time. Historically, it took many years. Maybe it's a little quicker nowadays because software updates more rapidly. But that process of root inclusion is something that Entrust could go through with again. They could absolutely go back, prove to Google and anyone else that they have cleaned up their operations. They are now doing things a certain way, however they choose to do that, and they wish to apply for re-inclusion. It's a viable option. However, it does mean that they are not likely to be able to sign a trusted certificate again until probably, I would say at best case, 18 months. I think, and that even that might be a little bit generous. It probably takes longer than that.
Yeah, it's years, right?
Yeah, it could be years, and that also assumes that all the root programs are indeed accepting new applications. I think there may be, one or two of them may not even be accepting new applications at the moment for new CAs.
Programs have been very clear that it is a first in, first out. So you get in the queue, right? And presumably you start at the back of the queue.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's the thing, because we haven't got an explicit slide on what Entrust might do next, because it's not our place to speculate about that, and it's not our, we don't know until they make some announcements. But what we can say is one of the publicly available paths is to go back and be re-included, but it is a process, as you say, Tim, that will take several years to take effect. It won't mean that they can't do anything between now and November that will mean they can continue to issue trusted certificates from November onwards.
Right. So no matter what, we all have to deal with this right now. Yeah.
At best place, there will be a multi-year gap from November to whenever they are re-included for them to get again. So as you say, it is an issue that Entrust customers have to deal with today and have to deal with in the next, 14, 15 weeks time.
Correct. Right. So, and what happens, right? If you have the certs, we know what this looks like, right? It's just plain not going to work. So what we recommend is, first of all, you got to figure out what you have. You've got to figure out what Entrust certs you have and where they are you need an inventory. And I recommend anyone who's listening to this, go get yourself an inventory. And even if you don't think you're an Entrust shop, you might have onesie twosie rogue certs here or there that somebody bought in retail. And anybody should do an inventory of your certs, try to find out if you have any. Because if you do, you're going to have a replacement plan for them. When renewal time rolls around, you're going to need to be able to replace those with certificates from another CA. And furthermore, if any of your certificates require replacement, those will not be replaceable after November 1 with an Entrust root cert. And this is an important point, because one of the things that we think of the certificate lifecycle, when we think about it, we say, well, okay, if there's a problem with the cert, I'll just get a replace, and it's just a replacement for the same cert, by which we mean the FQDN is the same and the org details are the same, and it's going to co-term at the same time, right? But from a PKI perspective, it's a brand new cert. It's an entirely new cert.
Yeah.
And that entirely new cert, even though you think of it as a replacement, quote unquote, in the life cycle of the certificate, still won't be trusted after November 1. So if I've got a 1-year Entrust cert and I've got 90 days to go, and it's November 2nd, and I need to replace it for some reason, I'm not sure the private key is safe, I can't replace that with an Entrust cert. At that point, I have to have a cert from a new provider. And so, that's an important thing to think about. We say they're going to live their full lifespan, they're going to live their full life cycle. Yeah, but they can't be replaced, right?
Exactly.
So,
which, if we're honest, is something that happens a lot nowadays, and it's not for any kind of bad or for security reasons. But most people will issue a certificate and have to reissue it at some point in its lifetime for standard processes, migrating to different server or software, wanting to run it on more than one server, things like that. And those lifecycle actions cannot be taken after October 31st.
Right. Yeah. Or hypothetically, if it turned out there was another misissuance event, and some of the certs that you have that are living out their lifespan have to be replaced because there was an unknown problem, then you couldn't replace them with Entrust certs. You'd have to replace them with something else, right? So under those circumstances, that's that's an important thing to know. So we would say, and let me put it this way: the most important thing is you got to know what Entrust certs you have, where they are, and you have to know what your action plan is for them. First of all, for renewal, which is inevitable, and second of all, in the event of replacement, which is a real possibility, and has to be thought of as a possibility for every single cert, even though it won't occur for most of them. And then you should decide, are you willing to live with that and let them live their lifespan, or do you want to do some kind of bigger proactive replacement on some or all of them so that you don't have that question or concern looming over your head? And this is going to be for every IT organization to decide individually, but that's an explicit decision that you should make. And then you should act on what you explicitly chose in terms of whether or not you want to replace some of these with different certs from a different provider. And then the last one is you got to be able to monitor and manage this stuff. Like at this point, you need to have them, you need to know what they are, you need to know when they're expiring, and you need a process and a plan to make sure that you know what's going on with all of these certificates. And these steps are all required.
Absolutely. I mean, I think a couple of points I'd add to this, Tim, as well, is number one, I think, and I know we're going to probably talk about this on another slide in a second, but this incident largely stems down from a CA that was unwilling to revoke certificates in the required time period. Right. And that, again, as you and I do countless webinars and meetings and calls on, that speaks to the requirement that we know we're going to see in the near future for shorter lifetime certificates and automation. So one of the possibilities out of this could be that we actually do see the timeline for short lifetime 90-day certificates soon. And that's something that needs to be considered in all this, because it's kind of the same as you and I have been talking about so often because we know how important it is, but this may accelerate that, as you say. This could be a precipitating event for the industry to move towards short lifetime certificates. And the next steps are the same anyway, but the next steps could be much more critical for any customer who has any CA in use, because you will have to start to look seriously at management and automation on all the rest of the stuff that we talk about. But I think one of the other points I just want to make very quickly on this, in terms of when you're thinking about what you can do, and again, for the same reasons that there are, you know, customers out there, subscribers that struggle to replace certificates, there may be some places where you need to evaluate whether a public web PKI certificate is the appropriate product to have in your system. If you cannot get to a stage where you can replace your certificates in 5 days because there is a revocation event that needs to happen, and the CAD forum and the web, you know, the root program guidelines say so, then perhaps it does not need to be a public certificate, and you should speak to, you know, us or your CA about private PKI and private.
Think about a private scenario there, right? If your certificates if your certificate use case cannot endure the rules of public certificate authorities, which does include potential mandatory revocation, then you can't use public certs for that because it can't endure those requirements. Just like if there were other requirements, like let's say you said, look, these certificates, for whatever reason, they really need to last 2 years, or I'm limited on the size of the key I can use, or I really need to use a deprecated algorithm and I'm willing to live with that. I really need to use SHA-1 and I'm willing to live with that. Well, okay, you own the CA, you get to live with those decisions, even if Nick and I think they're bad decisions, but you can't do it on a public route, right? And it's a similar situation for mandatory revocation. If you decide that you're going to lack the agility to be able to swap your certs out in 5 days or 24 hours, and you think that's okay, and you've decided you think that's okay, that's between you and your shareholders, but you can't have that on a public route.
Exactly.
Right?
Yep.
This is our 5 pillars model: discovery, deployment, renewal, revocation, and replacement, and integrations, with visibility as a capstone for all of these. And it's just good to think about this model as we're discussing all of this, because this gets into the holistic management concepts that we're talking about, right? Discovery is very beneficial in terms of getting that inventory and knowing what Entrust certs you have. Deployment obviously is extremely important. You're going to need that just in general. You're going to need that if you're doing some kind of mass swap out. Renewals, obviously, we understand the importance of that and seeing what they are, automating that to the full degree that's possible. Revocation and replacement, we spent a lot of time talking about that today, right? And the need to do that. And then integration with other systems is key, because certs don't live in a vacuum. They tie into these larger ecosystems that we have and platforms that we have, and being able to connect into all of those things effectively is essential to successful use. And then visibility is a capstone that sits on top of all of this. It's supported by those pillars, and it also supports those pillars. And so with visibility, you're able to understand what you have, and if you understand your PKI systems, then you can manage your systems, and if you don't, you can't. And so just, it's good to think in these terms while you're thinking about what you're going to do here. And if you have gaps in some of these capabilities, if you don't know what certs you have because you can't discover them, or you can't automatically deploy, or you have problem with getting renewals done without outages, or you don't think you can deal with a replacement, then this is a good time to solve that. And it may be that this change in CAs, or maybe if you're even part of one of the original incidents that precipitated this, I hope that this is a wake-up call, that these are all capabilities you really need to have organizationally. This is something that you need to solve.
Yep. Could not agree more. And it's the same thing we've been talking about a lot of times over the past several years, I'm sure. But it's just proving that the same things we talk about, the need for, you know, automation, the need for the short lifetime series, all of these things are absolutely happening. They're absolutely coming. They're absolutely necessary. And we are starting to see that it's not just something we're talking about. It's something that is actually going to happen. And events like we're seeing with Entrust is probably going to be one of the main causes for that.
Yeah, and so there's other things that are coming too. So we can't get this far without talking about the fact that, yeah, okay, you got to swap out CA providers. This is a major automation moment. This is a major CLM moment. If you're not thinking in these terms, better start thinking in these terms because you're feeling it firsthand, right? That's not the only time you're going to feel it firsthand. All of these things are going to happen for us. Shortening certificate life cycles are coming. 90 days is not an if, it's a when, right? We've seen what happens with forced revocations as a possibility. And by the way, it's not just Entrust. There's like 17 CAs right now in Bugzilla with open bugs that are the willful delay of revocations. Some of these stem into the tens of thousands of certificates. Some of these incorporate more than 50% of those CAs' active certificate bases. And all of these CAs have been messing this up badly, including some pretty big name brand CAs. And this isn't going to stand moving forward. Like if you've been enjoying a CA who's loose on revocation and lets you take all the time you want, wake up call. That CA's not going to keep letting you do that. Or if they do, they are taking their own life in their hands.
Yeah, I think that is actually a good point to note, Tim, as people start to look about, having to find another vendor in light of this Entrust issue. Be prepared for the fact that any leniency you may have had from Entrust or one of these other CAs you talk about, any leniency you may have had is very, very unlikely to be given in the future. If it is given, I would call into question how reliable that CA can remain because they may
we've
find
heard stories. You and I, as industry insiders, Nick, we've both heard the stories over years about the salesperson at the major CA doing a wink and nudge with the large enterprise and saying, well, we're not really going to hold you to that. It's hard to prove these stories, but we hear them.
Yes, yeah.
I believe them, even though I can't prove them. I think that conversation absolutely has taken place and does take place. I think anyone who tells you that moving forward is making promises they can't keep.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Rogue certificates continue to be a problem. We always run into people who have rogue certificates. That's why I'm saying, even if you think you're not an Entrust house, you should still check because there may be rogue certificates you don't know about. And then just general need for crypto agility. Like the one thing that's not even on my slide here, shame on me, is that in the next few years, we're going to have to swap out all our crypto anyway because it's going to all have to go to post-quantum cryptography. So this is the new normal. The new normal is that we need to be automated on this stuff, and we need management of this stuff, and we need visibility, and we need all these things we talked about. And there's lots of reasons. And the fact that you're experiencing one of them right now, this major changeover away from an entire CA, this isn't the last time that a major need like this is going to occur. So get agile regardless. But also get agile because you better, because as of November 1, you need to still have certificates. So with that, get going. I think there are about 3.5 months left before the deadline. I don't expect that most of us are going to want to wait until the last minute. If you're trying to figure out what you're doing and you joined us now for that, I think that's a great thing to do. And my recommendation is that you need to kick off a project like now. Find a vendor, get onboarded, be ready, know how the new tools work, shake them out, have certificates in production before November 1 so you know there's no little gotchas. You don't want to learn out that somebody pinned and you didn't know it, and you find out when things break. When you do that, you have to do that prior to November 1. So this is the time to go through that process so that when November 1 rolls around, you're just rolling with the new CA and you know everything is fine.
Exactly. This is not something that can wait. This is something that action needs to be taken now.
Yeah.
Not a whole lot of time before November.
And obviously we at Sectigo can do this for you and want to do this for you. And we're one of the world's largest CAs, and we have all the major certificate types, and we have a CLM platform, and they're integrated, and we integrate with a full set of important ecosystem partners and all of the other things that you would expect. We didn't go into a pitch here, but we have people who are happy to walk you through that, talk about our plans, our products, our services, how they fit with your needs. and whether or not that makes sense. And please contact us if that's something you want to do.
Absolutely.
If you like this conversation, I am the co-creator and co-host of a podcast called Root Causes. And Nick, one of these days we're going to get you on. I really want you to, there's some stuff that I want you to talk about that you have a unique perspective on. We do talk about all matters digital certificates, PKI, encryption, post-quantum cryptography, CLM, Acme, etc. And we would love to have you come join us wherever you listen to podcasts. And with that, Leah, I think we're ready for questions.
Brilliant, and we've got a few for you.
Okay.
Question 1, could this distrust also happen to other certificate authorities?
Oh, well, it did. So there was a small regional CA called e-commerce monitoring that was distrusted late in May. And this was actually the maiden voyage of Google's new SCT-based I got that.
Distrust mechanism, yeah.
Yeah, it's the new distrust mechanism. I got the letters in the wrong order. The new distrust mechanism, correct. The CST based.
Yes, yeah, the SCT based thing that Google had. So instead of a big bang, they were able to do that, and they tested it with a smaller region. I wouldn't say regional, but a smaller German Austrian CA.
Yeah, very small CA. Yeah, regional. Regional's fair. Yeah. And it didn't have a.
So yeah, it could absolutely happen.
Yeah.
It could absolutely happen to other CAs, and I mean, I think if you're looking for an alternative provider, you need to look for one that is at least in good standing and not at risk of that. I think, I mean, Tim, I don't know what you think, but I suspect we will probably see some more distrusted CAs over the coming weeks and months. I
will be stunned if we make it to November 1 without seeing more distrust events occurred. I don't want to name names, but there are a number of CAs with active bugs right now in Bugzilla who are not managing those bugs. They're not revoking their certs. They're not fixing their problems. They're not admitting their root problems. They're not responding well or on time. There are some CAs who don't seem to understand the obligations and commitments they made when they became public CAs. There are plenty of CAs that aren't doing mandatory revocations, just aren't getting them done correctly or on time, aren't admitting that this is a problem. And there's no way that they're all going to get away scot-free. I think that the root programs really just want to see a healthy web PKI ecosystem, and what they really want to do is they want every CA to fly straight. And I think that they're giving people a chance to learn and improve. And I would say that there's probably no CA today who couldn't, with the exception of the two that were distrusted this year, who couldn't really whip it into shape tomorrow and save themselves. But I've been saying this for 4 months and we're not seeing them whip themselves into shape. So at this point, I believe that a number of them won't. And honestly, I could imagine 5 or 6 distrust events between now and the end of the year, just looking at the real CAs and their real performance and how well they're doing. So yeah, keep an eye on that. And listen to Root Causes. We'll tell you about it if it happens. Next question. Am I shameless? I won't plug Sectigo, but I'll plug Root Causes. Okay, what's next?
What is the best way to migrate certificates if I have many of them?
Oh, well, we're big fans of Acme, right? If you can use Acme, it's great. Go on, Nick.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think I was going to say the same thing, but slightly more generic. I was going to say automation. I mean, any kind of automation you have, if you happen to already have some kind of certificate management solution in place, that will certainly help, because if you've got something in place, then your systems are already using Acme probably, or using APIs.
And if not, you can onboard a CLM fast, right? Sorry, Nick, I know I stepped on you there.
Yeah, you could, but I think that's ultimately what the answer is going to boil down to. If you have a lot of certificates, then migrating them from one CA to another is going to require some kind of automation, which is going to take shape in some form of certificate management solution. I think that's really the simple answer to it. I mean, you could, if you have a small number of certs, do this manually. You could go and get a certificate from a new vendor, replace it, and then you know you're going to be safe after November. But of course, that only applies if you've got a small number of certificates and people to do it. So at scale, it's going to have to be automation and certificate lifecycle management.
Yeah, and it's possible, again, that someone who's listening to this who doesn't consider themselves to be an Entrust shop, but has a few scattered around here and there, could handle that manually, right?
Yes.
And in the case, but you probably still want some kind of automation system in place. And if it's a matter of knock those out and put them in under automation with the new CA, that gets you there. But like, it's 2024. Automate your certificates.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Next question is, we're a business with many subsidiaries. How can I know if we have Entrust certificates in our environment?
Ooh, yeah. Well,
good one. It's discovery, really. That boils down to one of the things that we've said. It's certificate discovery. I mean, there are ways to look through the certificate transparency logs to look at public certificates. I mean, there's discovery tools, as said. Tim and I are not trying to pitch Sectigo in this regard, but we do have tools that you can contact us, and we can get you in touch with the right people to get you the discovery tools as part of our certificate management solution. But you can also go to places where you can look, search through certificate transparency logs. We do operate a free service for that, which we give back to the community, called crt.sh, and you could potentially go in there, put your subsidiary's organization name.
Search, by the way.
Search. Credit to Rob for that.
.sh, because otherwise people don't know what we mean.
Yeah.
So search, aka.
And you could go in there.
Go on, Nick.
Search for the subsidiary of the organization name, and you will be able to see all the certificates that are issued by various CAs. You can limit that to just certificates that haven't expired, and you should be able to get from that a list of any certificates, or an idea at least of any certificates issued from Entrust or other CAs based on those subsidiary names. Because an important note is Entrust specifically really only issued OV and EV certificates, so you can put the company name in and search based on that, and of course your domain name, and search based on that as well. So you should be able to use freely available tools or certificate management tools from ACA to do discovery and find out if any of your organization uses Entrust.
Yeah. And even if you think you're not using it, I recommend you do something, even if it's just something on search, crt.sh, because people get surprised by this all the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. And the next question is, you said the distrust will only happen from 31st of October 2024 onwards. How soon do you recommend sourcing a new provider for SSL certificates?
Now,
I would say yesterday, but now is good.
Yeah, and think about, again, the point I was making before. What you don't want to do is you don't want to start issuing the certs on November 1 and finding out that there's some kind of problem because you can't deploy them, or because, again, somebody pinned and you don't know it, which happens, and you might not know it, and you never detected it. And so what you want to do is you want to get going on these things early so that you have a chance to figure this out. And this isn't exactly analogous, but I think back to when we had our root deprecation, not deprecation, but we had a root expiration about 3 years ago, I would say, Nick. And there were a bunch of like stuff broke that nobody was expecting. And everybody, we talked to enterprises, said, hey, look, this root's expiring. And they said, well, we don't depend on that. We use modern chaining. It's all fine. And then stuff broke all over the place, and people went back and looked in their system and said, oh my God, it turns out we were dependent on it. And they didn't know. Right? And so I'm fully expecting the same thing here. I'm expecting lots of IT departments or development departments to say, oh no, we don't do anything like that.
And then find out they do.
And then you find out the hard way when you put the new cert in and stuff stops running. And so you need to be using the new certs far enough in advance of October 31st that in an emergency, you can rip it out, issue an Entrust cert, put in a ticket, fix the error, put in the cert from the new CA. So you want to be
I think I
rolling
would
with
also
certs before October.
definitely. I mean, I would also say part of it is depends on your scale as well, right? So look, if you have a
Yeah.
couple of certs by hand, everything Tim said absolutely applies. You want to do this as soon as possible, but it's probably an easy job. If you are an enterprise with any reasonable volume from Entrust of certificates that you need to replace, you have to think about the amount of time it takes you to go out and find a new vendor, maybe POC or do an RFI, RFP, RFQ process for multiple vendors, get that back, then go through the commercials, the legals, then get on to the technical testing that Tim's just talked about. That process can take, in my experience, a long time. And we don't have that long. As I say, it's barely 3 months. If you think you can do an entire new vendor selection, search, selection, POC, onboarding, sign contracts and get everything done, fine. But you do not want the end date of that to be October the 30th or October the 31st. So honest answer is you need to start today, preferably yesterday.
Or think about it this way. Why did Chrome give everybody 4 months to deal with this? Is it because they thought you only needed 2 months and they wanted everybody to have a nice, relaxing summer? Or do you think it's because they knew perfectly well that we all needed the 4 months? And I think it's the second one.
I agree. Yeah, it's something that takes time, so you better start as soon as possible.
Next question.
Next question. Can Entrust make whatever changes are being requested and verify increased security practices and gain trust again after they have been distrusted?
So yeah, to be clear, that absolutely is a possibility. We should have had a slide on this. My fault for that. That absolutely is a theoretical possibility. And like we said before, at that point, they would be treated just like any other potential CA. So if Nick and I wanted to go found a CA, we in principle could do all the right things and get our systems and checks and everything in place. We could go demonstrate to the root programs that we were ready and get included in their root programs and become a public CA. And that would be the exact same process for Nick and Tim's soft as it would be for Entrust. There is a concept of a queue, essentially, where somebody who's being examined or processed right now by a root program needs to be resolved before they will move on to a new entrant. So you don't necessarily get considered the day you show up. You can get considered the day they get to you. It's hard to tell exactly how long that process is now because it's fluid. In the past, that process took years. We do not believe it will take years moving forward, but it isn't a matter of weeks. It could easily be many months to a year to get through that process. And that's when you get to the front of the queue. And the additional thing for Entrust is Entrust would to do that, Entrust would have to find a way to convince the root programs that the things that had caused them to give up confidence before were no longer sources for concern. I don't know exactly what's going to be required with that, and probably nobody does, including the root programs, but it's going to be significant. It's going to be meaningful change. It's got to be more than mere promises. It's going to have to be something that is compelling and convincing, and I would say objectively confirmable by an outsider. And I honestly don't I don't have the roadmap for what form that would be. So this is
I think the other point as well, Tim, is Mozilla, particularly thinking about this in more detail, they have a public comment period when they include a new root. So if Mozilla did distrust and they were going all the way back through a new inclusion, there's going to be a lot of the people that were, and this is public researchers, independent third parties, a lot of the people that got involved on the Entrust bugs this time are very likely to have something to say about them re-included. So I would say the answer to the question is Entrust could go through a lengthy process of re-inclusion. That is a lengthy process. I mean, I think I was a conservative estimate when I said 18 months. It could take several years. And there is no guarantee that that will result in their certificates being trusted again. It does not mean there's something they can do between now and November, or say something in December that will get the light turned back on. That isn't going to happen. But they may be able to go through a lengthy multi-year process to become a public TA again. There are no guarantees, and it's a very long process.
I'm going to go a little stronger on that. I'd say not only no guarantee, that's hard. Like, is it doable? I'm sure it is, but I'll point out that nobody else ever has. And I think that's hard.
True as well.
I think getting that done is a difficult task, and we have to recognize the difficulty of that task.
Yep, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Great. We are coming up to the hour. We've covered most of the questions, but there was a few specific ones. We'll get back to you directly one-on-one. Thank you everyone for your time. Thanks, Nick and Tim. If you've got any more questions, do get in touch with the Sectigo team directly. If you like this webinar, keep an eye on our website where we announce upcoming webinars. And for now, thank you and have a good rest of your day.